folks. Thank you for joining me for today's Meet the Maker. My name is Sarah and I work at Addison Public Library. And I'm joined here today by Ashley, who has a career in broadcasting and teaching. Ashley, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your career?
Sure. So a little bit about me. My degree is actually in education. I have a bachelor's in visual arts education, and I also have an additional endorsement on top of that for special education. So that's called a learning behavior specialist. Over the past couple of years, I was working as a high school visual arts teacher, primarily teaching, computer graphics, 3D modeling and design, painting, drawing, things like that. Now, when the pandemic hit, everybody went remote, and oddly enough, that ended up sort of triggering a whole sort of major change gradually as far as my career path. When the pandemic hit and we had to adjust at the end of the 2019 school year to teaching through Zoom and doing everything virtually, I started trying to think about where I could find training that was translatable to teaching through a screen. What that ended up doing was leading me towards taking additional courses and additional training in media and broadcasting, because I wanted to make my art classes more engaging. I wanted to find a way to engage my students. So December of 2020, I started taking classes at the Illinois Media and Broadcasting School, or Illinois Media School. And it was a great experience. Honestly, if things were done under any other circumstance, if that opportunity didn't come my way while I was teaching in a pandemic, I would have never had time to take the class. I would have never been able to actually physically go to the building and do everything. But because that all started through Zoom, with my kids, I was able to kind of balance that and remotely commute. While I was doing that, I started to really come to terms with the fact that I really like doing this. I like, communicating. I like talking. I like recording, audio and editing audio and video. My students even started telling me that they enjoyed listening to my class because it was like listening to a podcast. And I was able to kind of apply those skills while I was teaching. I taught that whole school year last year, which ended 2021, and I graduated from the program in July of 2021. And I kind of started to think, I love doing this. I really enjoy doing this. And if I don't give it a chance, I'll probably regret it for the rest of my life if I don't take a moment, take a break from what seems safe and comfortable and try this other thing that I've kind of discovered that I love. I will regret it for the rest of my life. I will always have that what if sort of question going on in my head. So I took that break, and it was a little rough because, it's a huge change in career. I've got 2 children at home with me, that I need to be able to support. And so it was very scary, but it's led me on this path where now I work for a media production company. I help record a lot of interviews, edit a lot of audio, things like that, edit a lot of videos that go out to a variety of, methods of media, from commercials to, social media posts and marketing, to, apps and education, all that sort of thing. And it's been really a very fulfilling career change for me. 90% of the time, what I do, I get to do from home, and I have a lot of power and control over that because it's okay. Somebody emails me some links to a video or something like that, gives me some notes, and I edit it and send it right back out to them. Or I get to go on set and I get to meet a lot of really interesting people who have a lot of wealth of knowledge and experience to share with the world. So I'm able to have a flexible schedule that helps me, still be there for my kids and, manage and balance my work, life, family situation a little bit more successfully, rather than a traditional 9-to-5 job.
And so, this new career in broadcasting that you ended up in this because of the pandemic. You
Mhm.
took this opportunity when the world kind of stood still for a few a few months
It's
to
starting to move a little bit faster again. We'll
yes.
see what happens.
But so it was the pandemic that triggered a career change for you, which is something that I think a lot of people throughout the country have taken that same opportunity. And so before the pandemic, before this career in broadcasting, you were a teacher. So
Mhm.
how was that shift? How did teaching help you prepare for your new career in broadcasting?
Talking to people. you know, uh, when I was teaching, even in person, there's so much in education as far as your academic training and everything, where it is about communication and communicating clearly. When you're teaching, things don't always go to plan, and sometimes students ask questions or hit a problem or a challenge that, frankly, you don't know. And so being authentic when you're doing voiceovers or doing the broadcasting or meeting all these other people, that's a big part of what makes someone relatable. As humans, we're all flawed. And being able to admit, okay, you know what, maybe I don't know, but you know what, we can go on this journey together and figure it out is, another additional transferable skill. I you'd be amazed at how much of recording yourself you have to do even just to get your teacher's license. There's this whole process called the EdTPA, where you record yourself. You're able to watch yourself. You're able to pay attention to those mannerisms. You're able to pick up on those things. You develop those public speaking skills, where sometimes it's better to just pause and finish thinking out your thought before you speak instead of using the stall words, the uhs and ums. And so that is totally transferable towards, dealing with the microphone, being in podcasts, things like that.
Something that Addison Public Library did at the very beginning of February, or mid-February, I should say, was get a series of Get Addison Back to Work. Our business services specialist, Leslie, coordinated it. And it's a whole series of, job hunting and resume building type of programs. And it's great to hear how, like, you can pivot your career without losing those skills you had in your first career, taking those skills and transferring them to something new. So it's exciting to hear somebody here locally do that and be successful. And then also with this, Meet the Maker, what we're trying to do is highlight women makers who have jobs in STEM or STEAM. And you'll notice how I first said STEM because oftentimes we forget the A for art. And so you have a background in visual arts, your degree as an artist. So how have you incorporated your math and engineering and science with art? Where do you see that where those combine into STEAM?
Oh, I love this question. um, a lot of people say that, like, people who are into visual arts aren't good at math,
Mhm.
and I don't agree with that at all. I think that a lot of people, and I came across an article, I wish I could quote it, so long ago, that argued, or actually it was a study that stated that people who have a tendency to be really strong in visual arts are actually highly developed with their spatial reasoning. And what that means is these people are basically doing math instinctually, very successfully. Uh, they are measuring ratios and things like that. Ask like any art major, you know, oh, how many inches do you think that is? And 9 times out of 10, they're going to be able to tell you, like, within a centimeter kind of thing, how big something is. They're able to see all of those relationships and angles and all of that within something. But, it's not necessarily that pencil and paper. The combination of the two has always kind of seemed very implicit to me. When I was in school, I actually had never heard of STEAM. I had heard of STEM, never heard of STEAM. And one of my friends told me about it. And part of my school's program was to do a thesis art show before you graduate. And what I had decided to do with that was I wanted to find an authentic incorporation of visual arts with science, technology, mathematics, engineering, you know, all of that good stuff. How that ended up coming together was it was basically a series of simple machines, a pendulum primarily, that was pouring sand down on the ground to create a Lissajous figures. And Lissajous figures are a figure that is made through waves. It's something that you see in recording audio. It's something that you see in math. It all has to do with how something is set up as far as a ratio between a Y and the pendulum and all that good stuff. Now this, sort of very simple machine, I just make little minor changes as far as how it was set up, and it would create something wholly different each time as far as the design and pattern that it would leave. In addition to that, I incorporated something called cyanotypes. Now, cyanotypes are something that it's a big word for something that a lot of people have experience with. If you've ever done a sun print, those paper kits, you can get them, at craft stores all the time. It's this blue kind of paper, and you put it outside. You put like a leaf on top of it and a piece of glass over it, and leave it out in the sun. And it, it produces a print of something. And it was actually historically the precursor to our modern photography, our modern film photography, because it's a light sensitive paper that you're able to develop just with water when it's done. So I incorporated that into it, which brings in, the ability to have a conversation about how light affects things and how it relates to even visual arts, how color theory comes into play, and all that good stuff. I had to do a ton of experimenting with that project, where I had to try to see, what kind of lights would expose it best, because I wanted this to be something that was living and breathing and created in the space during the show. In a timely manner. So experimented with a ton of black lights and, different types of lights and distances. And there was a ton of experimentation. Art is so much about experimenting. When any artist first gets a piece of medium or something, before they even take a class in it or learn about it, or they get access to it, they just start playing with it. And so to me, ultimately, that is the biggest incorporation or biggest segue with science, technology, mathematics, engineering into the visual arts is think about experimenting with these things. With my current career, there is a huge creative side to what I do, but there's also tons of technology. In my home space, we're in my little recording studio right now, which is honestly little more than a closet. I've done a ton of experimenting and engineering as far as the sound in here, but I've got, foam set up in different places, and I target a specific way that I am aimed towards it to try to diffuse sound so that there's less coming back at the mic and you're getting more of just my voice, but also things that I have around here to help insulate the space. So that's engineering right there. I'm working with all the technology and all that good stuff. So
everyone likes to separate art from STEM or art from STEAM, but really it's just a nice mix of the two. I mean, you mentioned sound engineering if you're getting into music or production, and then the photo and chemicals needed for photography, which most people just assume that's entirely art, entirely visual. And if you're doing film photography especially, there's so much chemistry behind it.
So much chemistry, and there's so much choice that you can make when you're working with film. That I love film photography. I love it, love it, because there's so many opportunities to make different creative choices during the process of developing that photo. As far as even selective developing, you can pick and choose which spots you actually treat that chemical, and you can get a lot of really cool results. It's fun and it's interesting, and it's about creating something new. And I love that with my current career and when I was working in education, I have the opportunity to do something different every single time I use something. I'm never going to exactly recreate the exact same thing each time. There's so many opportunities to make changes and decisions and to build upon something and challenges. I thrive in a job that offers different challenges, and surprise, and I enjoy tackling that sort of challenge and finding the creative workaround or solution for it.
And so you actually had a challenge going back to your first career teaching. You actually had the challenge of learning how to teach 3D modeling and designing without much previous
Virtually none.
so how did you manage to learn 3D modeling as someone who didn't go to school for 3D design?
Well, my first real exposure to it was during my student teaching, and I was fortunate enough to be in a situation where it was something that was being taught at that school. There was no program, at my university teaching that subject at that time. One of the teachers that was my supervising teacher was teaching that subject, and I got to kind of get my exposure to it and have advanced look at the lesson plans and things like that. So I had a little bit of structure as far as I knew what the students were learning, and I was getting the same materials the students were getting. And my task was to at least stay a week ahead of them. And what I tried to do a lot of the time was to make mistakes.
Mhm.
I intentionally tried to miss parts of the instructions so that I had to force myself to figure out how to address the issue, because I know that, my job most of the time in that classroom was to troubleshoot random problems people hit. And, there was a lot of looking up resources online. There was a lot of asking questions from people who know more than me. There was a lot of trying to make something overly complicated, because, you have those students who are going to make something way more complex than what they need to, because they can, and it's great when they do, because really cool things happen, but they present different challenges. And sometimes when I was in the class, somebody would hit something that I didn't know how to address. YouTube has served as a great resource and sort of challenge sometimes with that sort of thing, because you don't have a great filter on what the quality of content that you're going through. So sometimes you end up looking through like 8 different videos to figure out how to solve a problem. Because it's a very public, not regulated sort of means of learning certain things. But with enough time and with enough effort and persistence, you can learn a great deal. Although I probably should have popped by the library, because they probably had a lot better resources than
Yeah.
easier access to, and a knowledgeable person who could help connect me with those resources.
For sure. As a library worker, all I can say is go to your local library anytime you have a question. YouTube is great, Google is great, but sometimes it's hard to zero in on exactly what you need, or sometimes you don't get the structure that you need. And so one of the resources that most libraries have available for residents for free is some sort of online database training. Here at Addison Library, we have Udemy. It's owned by Gale, and it will give you a course to take. So you're actually being guided through starting with the basics, and you're building your skills up, which is fantastic, because you just click on the course and it's 20 videos, and you just walk through all 20 together online with the virtual instructor, the video presenter. Some libraries, if you're not an Addison resident and you're tuning in and you have a different library, sometimes they have LinkedIn Learning, which used to be Linda. So check out the library. And then of course we have books, many books on 3D modeling software like Tinkercad. We have books on Adobe, and we always have staff who can show you how to access the online resources and our physical collections. So
and there's definitely a strategic way, method of learning skills, especially with computer graphics, with 3D modeling and design, with video and audio editing. There's definitely a start here and build upon it, sort of method. It's very challenging to sort of just be like, I have an idea, and then try to find a video on how to do it. As far as the internet goes, especially with 3D modeling, there is a strategy and a right way and wrong way process to learn those things, because if you end up kind of skipping to the end of it, then you don't have any comprehension of all of the stuff that needs to be done before, and it won't work out because they'll assume, certain knowledge is implicit. That there's a developing level of concepts, especially with 3D modeling, you want to learn how to work flat first, because you have to learn how to think in 3 dimensions on a 2-dimensional space.
Yes.
And there's a way of building upon that to develop that conceptual understanding.
Yeah. Yes. As they always say, Rome wasn't built in a day. Most projects, most computer skills also not built in a day. There's a lot of building blocks and learning off of previous knowledge to get to where you want to go.
You need your foundations. Got to build those up.
Both figuratively and literally when you're talking about 3D printing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See what happens when you try to print on air.
Yes. No. Supports are key. Sometimes they're the worst because you gotta remove them, and if you're not careful, you're gonna break your item in the process. But those are one of those necessary evils sometimes.
Absolutely. Sometimes you can sand it off.
So going back to kind of like some of the tools you use for these jobs, are there, and we can start with, 3D printing and then move on to your broadcasting, but are there certain tools, especially those open access free ones that our viewers will have easier access to, that you would recommend?
Oh, definitely. So let's see. With 3D modeling, I initially learned pretty much everything on Rhino 3D. It is a love-hate relationship because the thing is you can do so much in Rhino, but there is so much in Rhino. But what is amazing about it is they offer this 3-month subscription, free trial subscription for people to experiment with it and check it out. And there's a ton of resources on how to do things. There's a whole community, of people who are working with it. Tinkercad, fantastic. Actually, I'm shortly after this is going to debut, I'm actually doing a seminar for elementary school teachers called Tinkering with CAD is Elementary, on Tinkercad and how you can use that in the elementary setting. Tinkercad is wonderful because it works on Chromebooks. It's all cloud-based storage, so sharing those files between teachers and students, so easy. And it works with primitives. It's like having a building blocks kit and learning how to work with those sort of things and construct things. But you can also take pieces and cut them out of things, and actually get a lot of pretty complicated things as you build upon your understanding with it. There's things through AutoCAD, Autodesk that are available as well. If you're looking to sort of experiment with 3D modeling and design, something that I would probably start out on just playing with a little bit is Tinkercad, so that you can just sort of see how a lot of those things are set up, and then sort of graduate, to more challenging programs. It's really fun, and if you're ever looking for an idea on something that you can do, I love going to thingiverse.com, which is a site that is tied into MakeHER and their company, but it's a site where people go and just share their 3D modeling files for free. And people can download them and print them, scale them up, scale them down, all that sort of good stuff. There's free slicing software. There's also Cura, which is free. And so what slicing software does is it takes your 3D model and then it slices it and sort of figures out the path of what your tool will go and how it should move. So it's not like a 3D file, it's a vector sort of thing. It's about giving driving directions
Yeah.
to your tool as it moves. You can use those even with flat things, like if you're doing t-shirt design and you want to cut some vinyl, things like that. Also fantastic.
Yeah.
So much. I could literally talk 3D modeling design all day. But
Well, so then what about the resources for learning like video editing and broadcasting? What are some that you would recommend for that?
so as far as free stuff goes, that is available to the general public, when you're talking about doing things like computer graphics, you can do this site called Photopea. And it's set up very similar to Photoshop. It's all online. Make sure that you save, but it has a lot of the same sort of accessibility with that. Now with video and editing, WeVideo, great, free,
Yeah.
online, cloud-based storage, easy to share, doesn't take up a ton of stuff. Chromebook friendly, which is such a huge thing for teaching right now. If you have an iPad or a Mac or anything like that, you can use iMovie. Very user friendly. Tons of resources on how to work with that. Mostly what I use is the Adobe suite, because it's Adobe. They're kind of like the name and all of that, and have been around forever. Now, what a lot of people might not realize though is through their school district, if you got kids in school, pretty much middle school on, a lot of school districts actually have a free membership, free access for their students to the entire Adobe suite. You do need to run it on a PC or a Mac. That is a little bit of a challenge, but a lot of school districts offer that to everyone, and they're able to log in and gain access to that resource through an enterprise ID, which is basically you're using your school email address. And again, there's tons of resources. I'm sure you guys have a ton of books on how to work all of those programs too. That give, I've seen those books. They're about that thick, because there's so much that you can do in any of these Adobe programs. If you're out of high school, out of middle school, and you want to check out the Adobe products, they do offer things like trials. And if you're a student, college student, things like that, they do have a lower tier of expense as far as the subscription goes.
Yes. And then also, here at Addison Library, we do have our digital media lab. We call it the Sound Studio. And so we have the full Adobe suite available to anyone. If you're an Addison resident, you can book that room in advance. And if you're not a resident, you can walk in and still use it. So if you aren't a student, if you don't have a PC or a Mac, that is something that you can access for free as long as you come to the library and the Sound Studio is available.
And you know what, one thing I'd just like to add, there are literally like feature-length films now being filmed on cell phones.
Yes.
So, you don't always need to go out and spend a ton of money on a Blackmagic camera, or something that cameras cost a lot. They really do. But cell phones are surprisingly advanced at this point.
So, the camera technology in cell phones has been advancing so fast lately. And sometimes the only other piece of equipment you need is like a stabilizer, which we don't have one yet, but we might be getting one soon. So that's a little glimpse into the future for our viewers.
I've got one in the other room, actually.
Yes. Yeah. And for those who don't know what a stabilizer is, it's just a device that you can attach your cell phone to or your camera so it stays steady. So it's not a shaky video. So especially great if you're doing any type of action shots, for anyone who likes to record like their trick shots and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, I've got a small gimbal stabilizer, which does exactly that. Works through an app. I'm able to swivel and set all these extra little settings, zoom, record.
So What advice would you give to our viewers who are interested in careers in broadcasting and media production, especially for those who might feel a little hesitant to start a career in broadcasting?
Well, I'll tell you this much. Right now, I think one of my biggest regrets from when I look back, when I look at where I'm at now and who I was in high school is, well, there's a few big regrets, but professionally, I'd say that I really wish that I would have been in more clubs and gotten a little bit more involved in all of the things that my school offered. There was a media club there. There were classes. A lot of high schools do their own news production. I course that's a year-long course. You learn how to write, you learn how to talk, you learn how to film, you learn all of these different angles, and don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone. If you always stay where you're comfortable, you deny yourself the opportunity to grow. I, as far as somebody who is kind of interested in all of this stuff, but maybe they don't want to be on camera, because honestly, I'm not somebody who feels the need to be on camera, but I'm okay with it. I actually personally prefer to be behind the camera and directing things. I like to be on the editing side. I like to be more behind the scenes, but I learned a lot about how things work, and I learned to push myself into being in front of the camera, and I, develop that sort of skill. 90% of my practice getting more comfortable being on camera, being more comfortable on being on the mic, was at home, alone in a room, talking to myself. So, record yourself. Just start talking. Just do it with your phone. Do it with your computer. You don't always need to have all of the bells and whistles. Anybody can literally record a podcast. Anybody, for free, and put it out and monetize it for free. There's a lot of great sites that do that sort of thing, but just try it. You don't have to use your real name. People have stage names all the time. So if you have something that you want to say, and even if you're not comfortable being on camera, you can be on the mic. And one of the beautiful things about being on the mic and being the person who's recording it is it doesn't have to be live. When you're in the recording world, you can always do a second take. And so I feel like that in a way takes some of the pressure off of the anxiety of, maybe performing on stage or right in front of people or lecturing live, because I can always do a second take, and I only put out material that I'm confident in. It's not me going out into the street and performing or something like that. It's not me doing a live show. It's me producing what I want to produce to the quality that I want to produce it when I am ready to produce it. And so there's a lot of control on that sort of end of things. For people who are interested in learning a little bit more information, I took classes at the Illinois Media School. They have a ton of other campuses. This is a sort of national school. And so when I was taking these classes at the Illinois Media School, I had my teachers co-teaching with teachers in LA and also in Colorado. They also have a location in Lombard. They have a location in Chicago and a few other places. So, I highly encourage you to look that up if that's something that you're kind of interested in. If you want to get a tour of the campus or anything like that, they're wonderful. I love those people. They're great. And one of the bonuses of learning from that institution is all of your teachers are actually working professionals in the field. They are all people who actually have real field experience. It's not somebody who just learned it academically and then jumped into teaching. It is people who you hear on the radio. If you're looking to consider changing your career, if you're somebody who's a little bit later in life, I'm in my late 30s, and you're a little scared about making that change, it's okay to do those things gradually. You don't have to do it all at once like I did, where it's like, what, the school year's over, let's give it a shot. You don't have to just stop what you're doing. You can plan things on your own time, and you can build those skills on your own time and develop them and explore them, as you are able to. And so, just be open to those opportunities and not afraid to fail. especially if you're recording something, because if you screw something up, you just do a second take.
Well, thank you, Ashley, for joining us today to talk about your career in broadcast and media production and as a visual arts and 3D modeling teacher. And thank you to our viewers for tuning in for this Meet the Maker video. We hope you enjoyed it and have a nice day.